Hello, and welcome to Agents of Nonprofit. My name is Alexander Lapa, and I'm here to speak with everyday superheroes helping nonprofits. Joining me today is second-time guest Geng Wang to talk about his nonprofit, Civic Champs. Geng, welcome to the show. Welcome back to the show, I should say.
Yeah, hi Alex. It's great to be back. Had a great conversation last time, so excited for this one.
It's been about a year and a half, actually, since we last spoke. So the idea here today was to catch up on things that have changed over the past year and a half, lessons learned, mistakes made, bruises and bones broken, just to get people, caught up in what you do. But before we get to, of course, where you are today, maybe you could explain a bit about what is Civic Champs and what you guys do.
Civic Champs, we're a benefit corporation and we help serve nonprofits in both the United States and Canada around volunteer management. So if you think about the volunteer life cycle from applications to completing waivers and then getting scheduled, collecting their hours and tracking time to maybe collecting some feedback, finally reporting, right? We try to be there for every step of that journey for our nonprofit organization. So some example organizations we work with might be Habitat for Humanity affiliates, Boys and Girls Club, lots of animal shelters and thrift stores. And so folks that generally have a lot of volunteers that they depend on and could use some help in terms of streamlining the recruitment, engagement, and retention of these folks.
I realized I introduced you as a nonprofit, but you're actually helping nonprofits, right? You're not a nonprofit yourself.
Correct. Yes, we serve nonprofits exclusively, but we ourselves are not a nonprofit.
Cool. So about a year and a half ago, if you could summarize our conversation back then in a couple of words, where was your organization at that moment? What were you trying to achieve? What were your pain points? Where were your, where did you expect to be in the future? If you could just give us maybe just like a broad picture of, what life was like a year and a half ago.
A year and a half ago was quite different. I would say at the time we were just getting out of COVID in terms of seeing a little bit of interest uptick from nonprofit organizations, people really finally getting back into the swing of things. And that was really the beginning of that upcycle, if you will. Today we actually have a relatively different team outside of my co-founder and I compared to even that short time period. We've had awesome people join us, but oftentimes, Venture for America fellows, right? They have their 2-year stints and then they sort of quote unquote graduate. And so that's obviously different internally. I think as a company, I would say we really started to hit our stride maybe 13 to 14 months ago. And there was a number of reasons for that. But, when I say hit our stride, we quadrupled our growth rate, right, in a very short amount of time. And part of that was because of the industry and again, folks getting back into volunteering. I think part of it was we changed our tactics as well. And so we stopped doing any sort of outbound outreach to folks. It was all inbound and really started our own webinar series and newsletters in earnest. We had a little bit of external help as well from some advisors. And then, I also personally started doing more sales as well, which I think helped quite a bit. And that's probably one of the things I would change if I were to go back is have myself be in that sales role a little bit even earlier.
So if I got this correctly, so you switched from no outbound sales, no outbound, what was the leads? What was the first one?
Yeah, outreach. So we used to reach out direct, call people, email them, try to introduce ourselves to different nonprofit organizations. And so we don't do any of that anymore. And today it's all folks reaching out to us instead. So that say, hey, I'm interested. I want to learn more. I want to do a demo. And so the strategies are quite different, right? So it's more around generating interest either through search optimization on Google. It could be these webinars like I mentioned. Partnerships have been a big part as well. So we have new integrations that have gone live since 18 months ago as well.
Partnerships I find to be a really critical element in growing your business. If you can find organizations or people who are adjacent to you, not quite competitors, but in the same space, and you can do a 1-2 combination, that I find I've noticed in my own business, actually, that's one of the biggest drivers for growth because you both win, or actually all three of you win in that case, if it's
Yeah.
done well, done right. So happy to hear that. You also mentioned SEO, which I don't hear much of these days. I'm curious to know, what has been your return on your investment for SEO?
It's always a little bit nebulous on search engine optimization because it takes so long and there are things that are out of your control, right? Google can change its algorithms, for example. But one of the interesting things, for example, was I think maybe a month ago, we had our first person that told us that they found us through ChatGPT. Right. And so
Wow.
if you think about search, it's actually a little broader that includes actually AI search, where people, and even when you're on Google, if you search for certain things, they actually have their AI recommended answer in addition to sort of the listings, right, that they normally provide. So that's been really, insightful for us. I would say the things that have improved our SEO probably are longevity is always helpful. Two, we continue to put out a certain number of blogs and content pieces. One of the things that I think will really help us, but we're not quite there yet, is we're starting to do some more original primary research around volunteerism. The topic we're tackling right now is on volunteer retention and why do certain people stay versus other folks who are just one-time volunteers, right? And using both data and some qualitative surveys slash interviews, we're going to see if we could do a kind of a deep dive there to help the industry get a better perspective, but also from a SEO standpoint, right? Something like that is much more likely to be linked by lots of other folks that are going to cite the work, and so that's kind of the direction that we're heading down.
So that's the first time I've ever heard someone be recommended by or through an AI, which is awesome because that really, I don't know how the algorithm works exactly, but I have the impression that you need to be quite well established in order for an AI to recommend you. You can't be just a newcomer. So you're right. It definitely is a long game. SEO is a long game. Happy to see you're finally getting some return on that because it can get quite frustrating, right? You set up your business. You try to do everything you can on your website to be as search friendly as possible. You linking and cross linking and all that kind of stuff. But then you have to sit back and wait a certain period of time.
Right.
It could be even more than a year before you start seeing something trickling in. And it's always hard to even measure that because of the indirect nature of it. So kudos to you for having ChatGPT pop up your name.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I do think actually the 1 year mark tends to be a little bit of a turning point oftentimes for some organizations. My guess is the algorithms detect that the site has been around for a year plus. And that makes sense, right? Because your domain registrations are often for a year. And so this means someone has at least renewed their domain registration, right? And then they're still live and around. And, especially if you can show that the website has been updated with new content and information that's not just the same as it was before.
You also mentioned blogs and original research. Blogs for sure, I mean, that's a common practice, but the original research one is not as common. I'm curious to know a bit more about that because I can definitely see some value in there. And too many blogs and too many other articles refer or other research as opposed to you coming up with your own research. So can you tell us a bit more about how that works, how you set that up, what kind of articles you go for, what kind of research do you do?
Sure. And I can't really take credit for this concept, right? It's from one of our friends, Stephen Shattuck, who used to be the head of marketing at Bloomerang and is, still sort of, well known in the industry. But he really, he did a little presentation to a bunch of founders, and I happened to be there. And, this is sort of his recommendation is that having this original research, gives you authority, right? Because now you're not just some other person regurgitating the same, made up content that everyone else is. And especially in the quote unquote age of AI, you want to, you don't want to have just blogs that everyone can put out there because AI can just write it. But original research, AI can't do because it doesn't have that content. And so that was part of the idea. The other thought was that with influencers, everyone's always looking for content. that's interesting that they can cite and repost and talk about. And so you're going to end up getting on the radar of all these consultants and speakers who now have, are grateful actually, right, that you had this interesting nugget that they can use in their presentations, et cetera. And finally, one of the things they noticed when they were at Bloomerang was the fact that if you have this kind of research, you go from a breakout to a keynote speech at many of these conferences. And so that would be another reason potentially to do research like this, right? And so, yeah, I thought it made a lot of sense. And so we're still relatively new on that path, but starting to get the wheels turning there.
I love it. I mean, it makes total sense to me, and I like the aspect of the influencers that people are looking for things to repost, to add their own comments to and their own spin to it. But if it's done with everyone, like if you're producing original content, original research, they are able to do that in a way that they can't do anywhere else. So, I mean, you become, like you said, the authority, which is just, it's feeding itself, basically, what it sounds like. But I'm curious if you could just comment, because it sounds, and I know what the differences are, but maybe not all of our listeners do, the difference between, you mentioned a breakout room and a keynote room, or a keynote speech and a breakout speech. 'Cause it sounds like you went it sounds like you went upgraded, of course, by going from breakout to keynote, but what does that mean exactly in more tangible terms?
So a lot of conferences, they have their keynote speakers, or these single speakers that kind of are highlights for the event, and usually there's nothing that's happening concurrently at the same time. It's just the one speaker that everyone is listening to, and at the conference for all the attendees. And then on the other hand, oftentimes you have different tracks or different breakout rooms. And this is something that happens concurrently with lots of other activities. And so obviously the audience size is going to be very different, because even if you have an equal split, right, and you have 3 tracks or 3 breakouts, that means you get a third of the conference attendees, right, versus 100%. So if you might go from 1,000 people to 300, or 500 people to only 150. And so if you can be in the keynote, right, you just get a much bigger audience in terms of who you're able to connect with and reach out to.
When you were mentioning your tactics, you mentioned webinars. This, I imagine, are conferences. The conferences could be online, I suppose, or virtual, but I had the feeling that you're talking about in person. So would you add that to the list of tactics change, that you do more in-person conferences as well?
Yeah, so we definitely have done more in-person conferences recently. I think there's been kind of a resurgence in terms of in-person conferences. My sense is that work from home and remote has actually made conferences more interesting for lots of folks, because it's an excuse to actually meet people, your colleagues, your team, perhaps even. And we even do this where we'll leverage a conference for our internal team to get together, because oftentimes we're also remote. And so we don't see each other in person very much, but we'll use a conference or a presentation as an excuse for us to get together and maybe make our quote unquote retreat at the same time, right?
I can totally attest to that. Just last week, for example, there was announced a local Salesforce user group meeting here in Montreal. And the organizer didn't think there would be many participants because it's in the middle of summer, and who's going to be around. And it was actually about 30 people that showed up, which is a fairly good number for something that was only planned a week in advance. So I definitely think there's something to be said about the fact that work from home or hybrid promotes a desire to spend more time in person, so that these kinds of events are more popular than they used to be. There's something to be said about that for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. That's, I don't have a lot of data behind that one. That one is more of an anecdotal feel that I get.
So another topic you mentioned was advisors, external help. I think this is a great idea. It falls under the category of coaches, mentors, advisors. I was wondering if you could speak more about what kind of advisor did you engage, and what kind of results did you see, or could you measure those results independently from the other things that you've changed?
I mean, the most important advisor we have is one of our board members, Jay Love, who was the founder of Bloomerang, and before that, eTapestry, and so he is just a wealth of knowledge. Obviously, very successful in the space, knows the space very well. And his guidance on how to create a sustainable, lasting, and growing company, right, in the nonprofit space, um, is just in terms of the value is sort of immeasurable, right? And he also has this very, very, very kind thing he does, which is he invites a number of us to his house in Florida, and so that we can actually share learnings and insights with each other. And many of these folks, are further along than Civic Champs. And so, to see their path and then to maybe emulate things that have gone really well for them has been also super helpful. I think the other thing we've done more recently around the marketing side is just explicitly reach out to marketing experts and see if we can leverage their thoughts. And so the model here for me has been more of a topical approach. And so, for example, we're just bringing someone on starting today, since it's August 1st, to help us with our HubSpot automation and reporting and attribution, so that we can better understand whenever we do these marketing campaigns, what is driving the most value, where is it coming from, and making it easy to do that kind of reporting, right? So we know that HubSpot can be very powerful, but in many ways, it's like Salesforce. It's grown to be a professional tool that requires professionals to actually make the most of it. And so we have somebody that's helping us with that. We'll probably have somebody that helps us with content / SEO after that. And so for me, it's also really interesting because I can hopefully learn a bit from each of these experts, right? As they're helping us, we will internally get smarter as well, and sort of it'll upgrade our talent internally.
Is that the plan for most of these advisors, where you hire them for a certain period of time, you glean from them as much information as you can, and then you just send them off and hopefully have absorbed a portion of what they would recommend? Or is it something you planned to keep around for a long period of time and just have them as a managed resource, for example?
I think it'll be a bit of a mix in certain things. So like, for example, with HubSpot, we talked about a couple months to really set things up and to create the environment we need. There's probably a certain amount of upkeep, right, and things that we want to do ongoing. And so, but I can imagine, it's a bigger project up front, and then there's maybe a longer, tail. Other roles might be a little different, right? So if you have someone that's really good at writing and creating content, that might be an evergreen role, right? Because you always need that to continue going, provided you have the resources to keep them. And at times that is the challenge, right? Which is more of a resource. And I'm sure nonprofits can attest to this as well, right? You have to make choices. And so you would say, well, I want both of these. I can't have both. And so one option could be that I get one for 3 months and the other for 3 months, right? Or I just pick one and I just kind of give up on the other. And so right now, we're also trying to figure out what is the right combination there. And of course, hopefully we'll keep growing, and we'll have more resources so that some of the things that we want to keep, we can.
What I see for nonprofits is definitely at the beginning, hire an external expert to help you accelerate your progress significantly over a short period of time. And then either transition to someone who is more internal, like you ramp up an internal staff, an internal volunteer employee to take over some of or portion of the expert's work longer term. Of course, they won't be able to do everything the expert can do, but at least they can do a portion of it. Or they hire the expert again, and then they hire someone else at a lower rate externally just to keep the lights on. I find those two kinds of models, depending on the scenario that you're in, works. But the idea of initially of having that expert come in and a short stint to be able to really accelerate your growth at a really for them, it should be cookie cutter, right? They come in, they know exactly what to do, or mostly what to do. They implement it, they do it really well, and then they give you the keys as best as they can so that you can, to a certain extent, take it from there. That combination, I find, seems to work really well. So that sounds like you're doing that and a combination of the more longer term one as well.
Yeah, and I would say I was not a believer of that model for a long time, right? And I always thought, well, as a generalist, you could probably figure it out. And so if you just hired really smart people internally, they can always learn and do just as well. But I think there is a lot of truth in you don't know what you don't know.
Mm.
And these experts truly, and I was sort of shocked when we tried this the first time, they can do as much, if not more, than your generalists in half the time. And I was like, there's no way. Like, there's a volume of work that you'd have to do, and da 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 da. And it turns out, I was wrong, and they really can, generate just, even the volume is the same, but at a much higher quality at half the time, right?
I think it's just basically an example of the Dunning-Kruger effect, where you think you know more than you know because you have a little bit of knowledge. And you're like, I got this, I can take care of this.
Mm-hmm.
But then actually, the more you start learning about something, the more you realize there's much more to this than you initially thought. So,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Hiring someone as an expert because you don't know what you don't know, and they probably do, is at least one way of getting help and
Right.
really accelerating. So the last one you mentioned as well as a tactic is you got personally involved in sales. So what does that look like, or what did that look like?
I mean, that one's pretty straightforward, which is, I started to take more of the leads that came in, and I would just do the demos for folks. I think that was very helpful on two fronts. One is that it gave me, on a very constant basis, a very clear sense of what works and what doesn't. What do people gravitate towards? What do people don't like? Two, who are better customers versus not as good customers? And while the team could also see that themselves, like another salesperson or account executive, they don't have as much of a authority, I would say, right, to say, no, we're not, we're just not going to serve this segment. Or maybe they're less comfortable making that call to say, well, these people, I've talked to three of them, they're just not a good fit. And so the fourth one that comes in, I'm just going to let them know we're not a good fit for you. And we're all going to save a bunch of time, and we can move on to someone that is a better fit. And then from a process standpoint, it really allowed me to hone our process as well, to say, oh, well, here's how a demo could go, right? Let me switch out the components, or let me try a different flow. And so this is really important in a startup, especially because most salespeople are very used to having that playbook that tells them exactly how to do something. Here's the steps, and then they execute on it. I think it's tough, even if you have a good salesperson but don't have a strong playbook, that they're not as likely to succeed, right? I think that's a very different skill set, actually, that's doesn't always overlap.
So this is an interesting conversation because I can see how a executive director or a principal, a founder, wants to get more involved in the sales process and feels that they can do the best job possible because they're the founder, for example.
Mm-hmm.
But at some point, there's also a balance between letting go and making sure you have the team around you that can support your mission, support your process. So there's a balance between maybe defining the process initially, maybe refining it along the way as well. But at some point, one person can't do everything. There has to be a certain level of delegation involved. So it sounds like you needed to redefine the process, so you took it upon yourself. Is that the plan for you to keep on doing it yourself, or do you plan to reallocate it to other people? Like, I'm curious to know how you have mixed that balance in your organization.
Yeah, I would say, and as this relates to nonprofits as well, right? Your executive director should probably always be your best fundraiser. In the same way that the CEO should probably always be your best salesperson, right? And whether that's like individual sales, that's big sales, partnerships, whatever it is, right? Like bringing in dollars is very hard for somebody else to do an even better job of, if nothing else, just because of the title. Like if I had a different title, even my success rate would probably go down 5 to 10%, right? Like people, and so for me, on the sales front or fundraising front, I think that's a piece that I'm going to continue doing regardless, right? And that could be with other team members as well, right? But not a role that I will fully, give up, right? I think that's one of the lessons for me, at least, that I've learned. Is I probably stepped out of that role too early and too completely for a while. Whereas I feel on the flip side, let's say customer success, right? Could be an area that while I can be involved and I can, again, help shape processes and think through, there are certainly folks who are capable and able to do just as well, if not a better job, right? And they can sporadically leverage you to come in for upsells or cross sales or other opportunities that they really see, and have you help. And then finally, something like marketing, I actually do think is an area where external expertise really matters, because there's just so many types of marketing, so many sort of deeper content knowledge that's required to be successful, that having more experts or more people that are not me involved, I think is actually a better solution. Right?
So far we've talked about the things that worked, that allowed you to get the 4 times growth. I'm curious to know what didn't work. What have you tried and ended up, panning out or not becoming so interesting that you decided to discontinue it?
So obviously, outbound sales did not work that well. So we stopped that. People have a cadence of when they want, they're interested in purchasing or buying. I say that, I mean, there is an approach that seems like that it could work. We tried but haven't continued, which is you could do sort of mass email campaigns that are pseudo targeted at folks, and in hopes that 0.1, 0.2% of the folks that get this email happen to be in a buying cycle and thinking about your topic in that moment, right? And if your volume is high enough, it could work, right? It is a little spammy to be fair, and that's probably one reason we had a external firm try that, but then we sort of haven't continued. Other things that we've tried, I would say, we have not had much success with contractor engineers who don't directly report to us. And this is something that's probably pretty relevant for nonprofits too, because most nonprofits do not have a strong technical team, but they're thinking about innovation and wanting to do their own app or something new and different, and they're going to have to outsource that wholly to somebody else. And I think even for us, as a tech company, right, that has a lot more expertise in the space, we've just never really had good success with that model. We've had good success where we've had a contractor, quote unquote, that's a full-time hire essentially, that is part of the team. Our Ukrainian contractors, as an example, overseas, right? That's been fantastic, right? Like we can that's worked really well. But having someone just do the end to end has been tough. The one pseudo exception I would say is if they have a very niche knowledge of a very specific thing that you want done, that they've done again and again and again in the past, right? And so like an integration partner would be, Alex, you might, if someone's an expert in Salesforce implementation or an expert in a specific flavor of Salesforce, perhaps even, that could potentially work, right? Because they've done 15 of the almost identical thing that you're looking to do. And they're going to be able to do, that again, leveraging that expertise, right? But if you're going to have that person build a new Salesforce app, that's going to be tougher, I think.
Okay. Okay. I'm curious then, being a technology company, how did you leverage technology? And I'm going to just mention that what is I see common is that at the beginning of any organization, you don't want to automate too much too fast
Mm,
because you haven't figured out all your processes yet. You haven't
mm,
figured out all the way to do things. So
hmm.
there's a certain virtue to doing a few things manually or the long way, just to make sure that this is the right way to do it, in quotes. And then once you've got that process established, then you can start automating it to make your life easier. So automation tends to grow as your organization grows, and you might add more tools and add more complexity to it, which is totally normal. So I'm curious to see how you leveraged technology in the last year and a half. If you found certain things you were able to automate, made your life easier, and what kind of impact did technology
Hmm.
have generally on your success?
Yeah, no, that's very true. So we tend to leverage a lot of, let's call it, generalist tools. Your Google spreadsheets, your Google Forms, your and then Notion actually is our main Notion and Slack, right? Are sort of our two other platforms we use a lot of. And so Notion's somewhere in between what I would say like the Google Sheets transition to a dedicated platform like HubSpot, which we use as our CRM. Right. And so a lot of what you're saying rings true because, for example, we track our conversations, our check-ins with customers for a long time on a spreadsheet. And it was like, hey, here's a list of, customers. Here's the date the last time we talked to them. We have some sort of thing where we say we want to, touch base, in some cadence. And there's, some simple color signal that says, hey, it's been more the next day. So the cell turns blue, turns red, right? And you can see, oh, I have some reds here. And I go and, and so we're now transitioning many of those spreadsheets, and this is our project actually for HubSpot, into our CRM so that it's a more automated process. It's all in one place. And so that's been a transition as we've learned from our more manual things like, hey, what actually works, what matters, right? Do we really need to track all this data or not? We had some, let's call it dashboards that we made on a weekly basis for a while. And we said, hey, is this helpful to share with the team? And we made those, kind of manually on a spreadsheet and we just send it out to people. And some of that turned out to be no, like it didn't matter. People weren't looking at it. It didn't move, change behavior. And so we stopped doing that, right? And so I think there's a lot of truth to that in terms of getting your processes down first using some manual tools. And then as you have it more set in stone, thinking about automation and transitioning that.
I mean, you don't want to. It's very tempting, especially for me as a technologist, to want to automate everything from the beginning and get it streamlined. But then, to your point, it might not actually be used. You build it and then no one uses it, which is kind of a shame.
Yeah.
So that more gradual, incremental improvement is tends to work better. It's a safer, more reliable approach to technology.
We even do this for our integration partners. And so thinking through Little Green Light, one of our integration partners from this past year, very, very successful, but we started manually, right? And we said, hey, what if we just did like a monthly sync for some folks? Yeah, it's a manual sync. We'll do it at the first of each, business day of the following month. And what allowed us to do then was we could figure out what our fields were that we had, what their fields were, and how they were going to connect or not, and what format and all of these things. And once we had that and it worked a couple months and we said, hey, I think we have the data structured correctly. Then we had our engineers actually automate that process and say, all you have to do essentially is just do the same thing we did manually, but automate it, right? And that worked really well because there was a lot more clarity for the engineers, because a lot of times they're going to have the same question, which is like, well, okay, well, what fields do they have? Well, how am I going to map? And they have to figure it out. Whereas we could figure that out on our end as non-engineers, and then make it so that their job is much easier, in part because engineering is also very expensive.
Mm. That's a great approach. Happy to hear you're doing that. And integration, yeah, is definitely one of those tricky ones. It usually opens a Pandora's box of complications. So I think I approve of your approach, is what I'm trying to say. In
Oh, thank
terms
you.
of, oh, you're welcome. In terms, you mentioned churn earlier in the conversation, how you had certain amount of turnover in your employees. I'm
Hmm.
curious to know how you've dealt with that. Is there a particular advice or approach you can share with people, or have you been lucky just in finding good talent, or if you, and if so, what do you attribute that good luck to?
I think, recruitment for us has always been relatively quote unquote easy, in that we are in this really interesting intersection of technology and nonprofits, right? And so people that find startups interesting and cutting edge, innovation, it's kind of a quote unquote sexy thing to work on. And then on the flip side, like most people want to have purpose in their life. And so to work on a product that actually helps people, and arguably, I would say perhaps more so than even donor management platforms, right? Like, yes, you're helping people raise more money, but in this case, you're actually helping engage the community, right? And so people can really feel good. And so we always get lots and lots of applicants for roles. I would say, so and as a consequence, I feel like we tend to also do quite well in terms of the quality of the team, et cetera, right? I think for me, a couple things, right? So one is I think turnover is a natural state of for companies, right? Like you don't want too much of it. You also probably don't want too little of it, to be honest, right? Because getting new ideas, and by the way, right? Like what I'm often very cognizant of, and I'm very proud of, is when someone leaves us, right, or even one of my former startups, right, are they going to an even better role? Did they get a promotion essentially? Right? Are they making a lot more money? Right? Are they able to really propel their career in a way that if had they not been with us, that wouldn't be true? Right? And I would say, even our interns, right? We have folks that have gone on to work at like Goldman Sachs and Microsoft and Amazon, and I'm sure they're getting paid 4 or 5x right, more than we are. We were able to provide, but I think we were able to give them really interesting stories, meaningful projects that they could talk about in their interview process, right, for these interns. And then on the flip side, for our full-time employees, right, we have not weekly, we have monthly one-on-ones and feedback sessions, right? We do, we try to make sure that you're able to really have true ownership of areas so that on your resume, right, those bullet points that you can write about are just going to be really fantastic. And so that when you do decide to leave or you're ready for your next journey, you're able to find something, really amazing.
I'm really happy you said that because so many places think that they are just there to, I don't want to use the word drain, but absorb as much as they can from their employee, that they don't consider the other way around, that it should be a mutually beneficial relationship, that the person working for you should benefit from the engagement, not just through salary, but knowledge and expertise and experience, so that when they leave, they actually are in a better place
Oh,
than when
yeah.
they joined you. It reminds me of a quote from Seth Godin's book. He was a guest on my 100th episode. And in his book, one of his books, he wrote the quote I want to share with you that says basically, join us if it works for you, leave us when it doesn't. And if you leave with more knowledge than when you came, it's a symptom that we did well together, which I thought was beautiful and eloquent.
Yeah.
So the idea here is, it's just that, you do want to have, you both want to be in a better place, employee and employer, in a better place once that person leaves, and that turnover is okay, because you're right, fresh blood also can help, new eyes, things can get stale. I'm not quite sure what the right percentage is, but at least it is normal to have a slight
Yeah.
amount of turnover.
Right. And I'm probably skewed in my perspective, right, in terms of my early career. right? Working at like McKinsey, consulting firms where it's the expectation is everyone leaves after 2 years, right? And then so but they train you and they invest a lot in you and they really try to grow you as a person. And for them, it's selfishly, right? That 50% of their business is from alumni. And so, they're putting out into the world essentially sales prospects at some point. And that's not quite the same for us, but I feel like people are smart. They'll reach out to people that used to work here or work here today and say, hey, how is it? Right. And you want that to be also sort of a ringing endorsement of the firm.
So that's been the past and the present. I'm curious to know about your future. Do you have anything that you can share with the audience about, where you would like to see things? You talked about, of course, your marketing expert and doing more automation with HubSpot, but is there any other plans on the roadmap that you are looking forward to doing in the next, let's say, year or two?
Integration partners continue to be important for us. I feel like we're just scratching the surface there. It's really important for a lot of nonprofits that, their volunteer data can be in their donor CRM as well. And so we're going to support more and more of those, right? So now we have a monthly sync for Salesforce, a monthly sync for, Donor Perfect. We're exploring what that might look like for folks like Neon One or, Give Butter, right? These are all folks that we look at. And so that's kind of an exciting piece, is just really building out those connections and that ecosystem that we get to be a part of. I think the other piece, right, is as we grow large enough, we're now starting to get bigger cohorts, right? And so we have about 50 or so Habitat for Humanity affiliates, as an example, which is actually, that's a decent sized cohort at that point. And so I'm trying to think, could we provide more support for them, more specific, things that really help these cohorts. And so that's kind of one of the things that's top of mind is, are we able to be even more nuanced in our approach? And so as an example, marketing related, we have newsletters, and we actually have 5 weekly newsletters now. Wow. Which is a little crazy. There's our general one, but we carved out Habitat for Humanity. We've carved out animal shelters. We carved out hunger relief, and then we carved out mentorship. And so each one of those verticals actually gets their specific version of our newsletter, right? So the nonprofit we highlight is different. The articles that we share are different and a little bit more specific to them. We have a grant section we've been partnered with Instrumental with. And so and those grants that we recommend are different and very specific to their cause. And so, those are some of the things that, that become possible as we grow, because we have enough of a cohort that we can that it would make sense for us to serve these more nuanced recommendations.
Geng, this has been awesome. Thank you so much for sharing all this progress you've made. I'm hoping that our listeners will have taken away some notes, because it's great to see, what has worked for others, some tips, tricks, and so on. And I'm sure there might be some people out there who would love to contact you for more information to learn more about Civic Champs. So if you could share with them, how do they get in touch with you? That would be great.
Sure. So Civic Champs is CIVIC, and then Champs just like champion, CHAMPS. So my email is just Geng. It's GENG @civicchamps.com. You can also find me on LinkedIn. Pretty easy. My last name is WANG. And so feel free, to reach out either way, or, you could book a demo with us on our website as well. So always happy to meet new folks.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Alex.
All right, that's it for today. I'm Alexander Lapa, and I hope you join me again in the next Agents of Nonprofit.